is up, Force fam? Star Wars Dad back for another video. Today we're going to be doing a rundown of my 10 favorite new decks with new leaders. Of course, not talking about the old leaders and the new additions. That's a whole different video of some sweet upgrades. I just did a video on a Django Tarkintown with the upgrades, and I absolutely love where that deck is at now. But before we get into today's video, please make sure to join my Patreon, as we have lots of great content on there. We put out a new deck list for paid members almost every day, and we're building a great community there. And please make sure to like and subscribe. It greatly I greatly appreciate it, and it really does help the channel to grow. And make sure to sign up for the 3,500 subscriber giveaway. But to get into today's video, it's in no particular order as far as like which one I like the most. I like so many of them, it's too hard to pick which one I like the most. This one is one of my favorites though, the Poe ECL one. But I put them in order as far as just like aggro into like more mid-range into more like control, or not necessarily control, but like just more late game, like the Admiral Piett decks. But so this first one here, if you haven't watched the video I did on this one with the gameplay, definitely check that out. But this deck is focusing on using some of the cool synergies that Poe Dameron, the new leader, has, which is really, really cool. If you haven't checked out Poe Dameron, again, make sure to check out that video. But it says flip this leader for 1 cost and attach him as an upgrade to a friendly vehicle unit without a pilot on it. So basically, you can do that once per turn at any given point, as long as Poe is not deployed. You can use cards like Eject to then detach Poe and cheat out Poe earlier. You can do that multiple times a game with Eject, even after Poe has deployed, which is one of the coolest things about Poe as a leader. You can do things like attack in with the space unit that has Poe attached to it, and then use like Heroic Sacrifice to then sacrifice Poe. So you can do things like attack in with Poe Dameron and Heroic Sacrifice it, and then deploy Poe if you haven't deployed it yet and you're at 5 resources. That is really cool. That's one of my favorite plays. That's one of the reasons why we're playing 3 Heroic Sacrifice, because it has great synergy with that, so that you can get in for, attack in for +2. Let's say it's on black 1, right? So it gets +2/+1. So then black 1 becomes a 5/4 that can do 1 damage to a unit because of Poe leader ability that it has built into the card. You're attacking in for +2 with Heroic Sacrifice, or attacking in for 7, and then you're deploying Poe and attacking in for 4 more on the ground. So that is very, very cool. You can really have some big turns where you like come out of nowhere and attack for 20 damage. It's crazy. In the video that I did with Poe on this deck, I had one example where I attacked in for 20 damage out of nowhere and just blew the game out of the water. The 3 Rebel Assaults, because of all the Rebel synergy. We are playing 11 turn 1 space units so that we can maximize our ability to try and play Poe on turn 2 and eject it on turn 2 as well, so that we can cheat it out. What else? Of course, we're playing K2SO because of the Heroic Sacrifice synergy, and ECL synergy is just great. And then we're playing on the top end the 3 Chewbacca, the 3 Poe, and the 2 Wrecker is kind of our closers. Chewbacca, of course, has multiple purposes. Poe Dameron, I think, gets even better because of all the upgrades that are going to be used in this set. And Wrecker's just a really good finisher, of course. The sideboard is still a work in progress. I mean, like, that's gonna change weekly as things shape up in the meta. The 2 Trench Runner in the sideboard for me, because that card can be very hit or miss, and I think it's a card that I want to bring in against like aggro mirrors in case I'm behind, because then I'll take the risk of my ship dying to get in for that +4 damage potentially. The Leia, I think, is going to come in against aggro mirrors as well, and the Planetary Bombardment is going to come in against more like mid-range control for games that last a little bit longer. But this is definitely one of my favorites. The new Luke Skywalker unit is another amazing card in here. I absolutely love it. Just as a 3/2 on the ground, just being able to give us more pressure on the ground as well after it's been attached to a unit. So just some really, really cool stuff in here. This is more Rebel focused. I have another Resistance version, and I'll pop that up on the screen real quick, where it's a little more focused on a variety of things and not focused on like the Fleet Lieutenant Wing Leader synergy and the Rebel Assault synergy that this deck has. The next one, okay, Wedge Yellow. I did a video on this one as well. The coolest thing about this one, I think, is just how much uh, Nabat Village really helps you just like have explosive turn ones that can just you can just easily run away with the game. I think one game recently, and I'll try to show the example here. I think I had a cartel turncoat and another cartel turncoat as a and something else. I'll show the video, but it was just like there's no way my opponent had no chance from turn one. Just that much pressure on turn two, swinging in for like 7 or 8 damage, plus the ability to boost my attackers up even more with things like Surprise Strike and Han Solo and even Rebel Assault in certain situations. It's definitely mostly Rebel focused, but the Cartel and a couple other things are not, like the Millennium Falcon from set one and the Poe Dameron unit. But this deck is a lot of fun. I think this deck is super good. I really like the ability to cheat out a lot of these pilots for absolutely nothing. Like Dagger, Nia Nub, and R2 are all free in this deck. Han Solo can be played on turn one, so can Poe Dameron as a pilot. On Cartel, which is amazing. Chewbacca being played for 2 as an upgrade is amazing. It's just a lot of fun. I really, really enjoy this deck. We're using the eject synergy as well because of all the pilots. Not as focused on it because we can't do the cheat out Poe on turn 2 thing, but we can still do some really, really cool things with like Chewbacca and Han Solo, where we get those units on the ground to apply additional pressure or like even arena dodge and draw a card, which is really, really cool. So another really fun one. You should definitely give this one a shot if you're looking for like one of the aggro decks that I think is going to be a competitor for some of these other aggro decks that we've seen in the making. The sideboard is still kind of up in the air. I have no idea why Jam Communications is in the sideboard right now. That is not supposed to be there. So I definitely say that's a flex card, but I think it's supposed to be that new pilot, the five resource pilot that when you attach an upgraded attacks in for +1 immediately. So it like has a lot of synergy with all the piloting that we have in here as like kind of a closer. A 3 Bamboozle I think is going to be really important. The Waylays are going to be really important for like slowing our opponents down that are getting off to a faster start than us. But yeah, I mean, my favorite part about this deck in particular is just like the insane hands that you can get because of Nabat Village and just really setting yourself up to be explosive, which is what you want to do in this list. The next one, Major Vonreg ECL. I did a video on this. I haven't done gameplay on this yet, but this one is super cool too. The synergy that Major Vonreg has as an upgrade on turn 3 with some of these space units, including the, most importantly, the Vonreg's TIE Interceptor, just being able to swing in for 7 damage as a 6/7 in space. Even Consortium is a good target because then if you're able to hold the initiative, that's a restore 2 as a 6/6 in space, which is really sweet on turn 3. You're just applying a ton of pressure here, playing a lot of cheap units, cheap space units. Using the upgrades of the Wingman, which are really cool. Both of those cards are sweet. The 3/2 and the 4/3, I really enjoy both of those cards. They're so much fun. Using Dengar as kind of a way to just put your opponent under more pressure and force them into places where they want to, take less damage to their base, but sometimes they might not be able to, and it also sets up your barrages. This is still a work in progress. The Darth Vaders, I think, are kind of there. Well, the Darth Vader that's a pilot, of course, that just has synergy with all the space units and just can be played early, and then it can ECL later as a 7/7, which is really, really awesome. Ruthless Raider, of course, is one of our closers, and we have a third copy on the side for those more mid-range and control matchups. The Vaders, a couple of Vaders in case we get up against more of like a restore heavy deck or mid-range opponent, or even a deck with like bigger ships so we can replenish our board and try to keep the pressure on, or more of a control style build. The third copy of that in the sideboard as well. And then a couple planetary bombardment in the side for those same kind of matchups. A couple of traders I think are going to be in here for those aggro mirrors and just other matchups where our opponents are playing a lot of cheaper units. so we can just steal that heavily space upgraded unit. I think Trader's just going to get even better. One copy of the Starship Thief for the decks that were able to put that on and steal like the transports in space. This has just been a really another fun one. I really enjoy. I think it's going to compete for with these other aggro decks like Poe and Wedge. I think it's going to be up there. This is a new leader, so we're still not at the optimal list yet, but it's getting there. But I really enjoy this one as well. It's definitely one you should check out if you haven't messed around with it yet. Wedge Tarkintown, I think, is another one worth mentioning. I think it's just the Tarkintown factor is definitely a different style of play than the yellow one. You're not as focused as the explosive turns as much. You're focused on more like removing your opponent's threats early and then cheating out your pilots to give you an advantage so that you can. And in here, we're cheating out Biggs. We're using R2, Neon Nub as our early pilots. We still have the Poe and the Chewbacca's. A little bit of a different list, but this one feels really good as well. Again, we're focused on the Rebel synergy in this one. I really like this one as well. It's hard to say which one I like better, Wedge Yellow or Tarkintown. I think they both have their strengths in different ways. And then again, in the sideboard, we're using like Trench Run in case we're behind, which I could see that happening in this one a little more often because it's not as explosive as some of the other aggro decks, but it can still have some incredibly explosive starts as well because of your ability to cheat out pilots. I mean, that's just a great advantage, and that's, obviously where Wedge can outpace other decks because of your ability to just kind of have these spaceships with 4/4, 4/5 stats on turn one because you're cheating out pilots. I mean, what is it? Let's say we have a Phoenix Squadron with a Biggs on it. That's a 5/3 on turn two. Now that is susceptible of being ambushed in, so that's not necessarily the best. But the Neon Nub, of course, makes it a 4/4 on turn one, so that's really good. So things like that, like getting a 4/4 on turn one. Another example is if you put the Biggs on the Green Squadron, that makes it a 3/4 attacking in for 5 on turn two. So that's really good. So just some really cool things you can still do in this list. We're using the Red Squadron and the Gray Squadron to set up those Tarkintown pings as well as like Daring Raid and Red 5. So that's really cool as well to kind of slowly spread damage around to kind of ping things and take them out. I really enjoy decks. If you notice, like even in my Poe deck, I'm playing like the Red Squadron, of course, which is a given. But you'll see in some of the other lists that I'm about to show with like Luke that I really enjoy the Gray Squadron and the Red Squadron combined because they really do a good job of setting up knockouts, and then they're putting the mental exhaustion factor on my opponent where they're constantly having to decide what to do every turn. So instead of just like, for example, my turn's over, my action's over, right? Now it's my opponent's turn, but I don't get a chance to like think about my next move as much because my opponent's like, all right, I'm doing this to you, and then it's your turn. And I have to decide where to put this indirect damage at, or the damage from Gray Squadron, or whatever, whether I want to put it on my base or on a unit, and I have to decide what's my opponent trying to do here. Are they trying to immediately remove that unit based on what my board state is? So it forces me to like really have to use more mental power that otherwise could have been focused on me planning out my next turn so I can make the optimal play and making sure that I'm not doing something to set up my opponent. So I like decks like that where I'm putting a lot of pressure on my opponent to figure out if they're going to make the right choice or not. And that's where I think the indirect damage is really going to change the game in some ways. And a lot of these matchups, that mental exhaustion is going to be a real thing. So make sure you drink lots of water and eat your Wheaties because those long days are going to be a lot. The next one, okay, so this is what I'm talking about here. Now this one, I'm a little more focused on just trying to close the game out on this particular version of Luke. Now this particular the Luke Green version, I think could go either way with the 30 HP base or ECL. I think that's still we're kind of still figuring that out because it's not as aggressive as some of these other decks that we just saw because Luke is flipping on 6. But there are some really cool components because you have the use of ECL where you can kind of take things out to slow them down. You're setting up knockouts with Luke and Daring Raid and Red Squadron. So another fun one. Where would I say this deck's strengths are is obviously just like when Luke flips, your ability to just run the game over. I do think that the K turn card is a card you should consider for any Luke deck because of how much power, kind of like what Anakin was doing last set, where you really just can run your opponents over and just have a really powerful flip turn. I think that's similar here with Luke, as long as it's attached on the right ship, where you're not attacking it with something for more than 6 power, which is pretty easy to do if you plan out your turns right. But my take on this has been a little more defensively, again, like where I'm trying to kind of make sure that my opponent doesn't run away with the game, slowly ping things, because Luke, you want to use Luke's ability to kind of slow your opponent down and to take knockouts. You often don't have the initiative, if that makes sense, when you're using the action ability. So because of that, I tend to play Luke a little more defensively. The two ways that I prefer to play this deck, and actually I put a few different Lukes in here because I still think we're figuring out which Luke is the best. Obviously, it's really, the set hasn't come out yet, but I do so far favor Luke Blue because of the restore effects and some really cool things you can do. And then I like Luke Tarkintown because it just has so much synergy with Luke's ability. So, and I'll show you that list here in a second. And actually, the next video I'm gonna do is playing Luke Tarkintown on to show you kind of some of the lines of play and how much fun that deck is as well. But I really like this one as well. You can use the new Luke Skywalker unit, the Phoenix, obviously the Red Squadron. Red 5 is very, very, very good in here. It's one of your best targets for Luke Skywalker because you can just do 5 damage to any unit at any given time when Luke is attached to it, which is just amazing to be able to do 3 damage with Luke's ability and then 2 damage with Red 5 to finish it off. The sideboard, I have some restore effects for sure against those more aggressive opponents because we are playing the ECL, so I want to make sure I have ways to gain life. And again, the sideboard is still a work in progress with the couple of disabling Fang Fighters, a couple of K2SOs, and the planetary bombardments. K2SO and planetary bombardment are going to be for more mid-range and control matchups. Disabling Fang Fighter, there's a good chance it probably just needs to be in the main board with how many upgrades you're probably going to run into. But again, we're still kind of figuring this out. But this is a good starting point if you haven't tested this deck out at all. The next one is the Tarkintown version. So, like I said, this one just has so much synergy with Luke's ability. So my way of choosing to play this, and I'll talk more about this when I do the video on this next, but is to play more defensively. And that's why I have the open fires in here instead of the K turns. So I'm using like Daring Raid, the Gray Squadron, the Red Squadron. We're pinging with Luke. We're pinging with Red 5. We're using open fire and aggression. So we're playing more defensively while slowly starting to take over the game. And we can still have some really aggressive swing turns because of the upgraded units, because of Fleet Lieutenant, because of Heroic Sacrifice. And Heroic Sacrifice is in here, of course, as a way for us to catch up, to draw cards. Kind of does a similar thing to Fleet Lieutenant, as I'm sure you're aware. Frisk is really nice to defeat upgrades early. We have Aggression to defeat upgrades later. A couple Poe in the sideboard to defeat upgrades, and a couple of Disabling Fang Fighter to defeat upgrades, and then a couple of Trench Run for those more aggressive opponents in case we're behind. So I'm still trying to figure out if I want the Crate Dragon in here or the Chaos of War, or if that needs to be K-turn in the sideboard again. But this is kind of where I've started, and it feels great. But we'll kind of get into, I haven't tested it fully against other people yet, so that is where I need to kind of see if I need to tweak things some more. But early testing, it's felt great as far as just like feeling the lines of play and the consistency of what I'm trying to accomplish, which is pinging everything and setting up knockouts with Luke's ability while putting pressure on my opponent. So we'll kind of see when I do the play testing, and I'll kind of give you more input on that. But this is another really, really fun one, and I have really enjoyed testing it out so far. Here's the Luke Blue one. Like I said, I'm talking about 3 Lukes, but I figured put them all in a row so we can kind of talk about the differences. This version can get off some explosive starts if you have the Page Tycho attached to like your red squadron or your resort arc, because your unit is just getting stronger every turn. And if you combine that with like an R2D2, it can just you can swing in for like 6 damage on turn 2 with like I think it's a 6/7. So if you put it on resort arc, for example, it becomes a 4/5. If you add the R2, it's a 5/6, and then if you attack in, it gives itself an experience and does a damage. So it's just swinging in for 6 damage. So if you have that turn, one, obviously you can have some real explosive turns. You're a little more balanced in this version. Again, you kind of like the Tarkintown, but with restore effects and more effective pieces of removal with like Takedown, Vanquish, and Rivals Fall, and Luke Skywalker, of course. And then you have subtle restore effects throughout gameplay with like Hera, Top Target, Yoda early on. So in Restore Arc. So it's felt really, really good in testing. This one I very, very much enjoy playing this one. Sabine's Masterpiece is another one that gains us 2 life if we have a blue unit out, which is sweet. Like I said, Gray Squadron gets better because you're upgrading it. So it's hitting your opponent's face for more damage when you upgrade it to a +2/+3 or +2/+2. Then it becomes a 3/5 or a 3/6, right? And then it's swinging in for that +2 more. So it's swinging in for 5 if they have no units on board. And then you're pinging them and setting up your knockouts with your red 5s and your daring raids and your red squadrons and all that kind of stuff. Even your Poe Dameron as another alternative to do that. We do have the K turn in here in the sideboard. A couple of force throws for that. We do have some force synergy against, I would say, like more control decks or decks that we can damage things without too much issue in certain situations. I would say more like mid-range opponents. A couple K2SO for those control matchups. Fell the Dragon as another piece of removal for non-leader units, and a second Rivals Fall for both. So this one's really fun. If you haven't tried this one out yet, I definitely recommend this one and the Tarkintown one for sure. Like I said, the Luke ECL one is the one that I need to work on the most. Both of these have felt, the Tarkintown and the blue one have felt really, really good so far. The green one definitely feels like aggro can really have certain situations where it just kind of gets run over. So I still need to kind of work out some kinks in this list. But again, it's a good starting point, and you might need to add like Leia in the main board. That might be a good thing because we have a decent amount of pilots in here. So I think, what do we have? 3, 6, 9, 12 pilots. Yeah, that's enough where like Leia's gonna, when it ECLs in, it's going to, give us that when played effect of being able to restore 2. So it's worth it, I think. Okay. Next list, I did a video on this one, I want to say 2 to 3 weeks ago. It's been a while. I haven't made too many changes to it since then. I probably need to revisit this one as well, but I do just want to point this out. Like, this is another really fun deck to play. Again, we're using, it's kind of like more of a mid-range version. Like, we have different pieces of removal, the different forms of life gain with Top Target, and the new pilot, or the new spaceship, the Onyx Squadron Brute, and then the 3 Vigilance. So we have multiple ways of gaining life, multiple ways to try to close the game out later on with like Planetary Bombardment, which if we have a capital ship out, it does 13 damage with Boba the Leader, which is insane. The 3 Ruthless Raider obviously is a capital ship. The Devastator is a capital ship. This one, I still think it needs some tweaking. It's definitely early on. It's definitely trying to figure out the best way to play this one. There's a yellow one that I think is decent as well, but definitely that's another one that's just a lot to wrap your head around this early on in the set. And I'll post a list of where I'm at right now, but I'm sure both of these lists will look a little different as the meta shapes up. But this is just such a fun deck again, like just putting all that indirect damage, getting the additional indirect damage with Boba. Just again, we're talking about that mental exhaustion factor of constantly making your opponent make decisions during your turn, so that they cannot focus on their own turn as much and what they want to do in their next action. Which definitely, I think over the course of a long day, that's a really important factor, especially if you fine tune this list and get it to a place where you're able to beat a good variety of things. We have a ton of indirect damage in here, of course, on purpose. The First Order, the droid missile platform, the Dengar attachment, the Fetz fire spray, which is so good in here, especially with Boba attached to it. The I think, and then we have like things like Ruthless Raider that does damage, and the Devastator that does damage and helps us to close the game out. I definitely need to revisit this one soon because I think this deck is really sweet. I do think the No Glory Only Results card is amazing. It's just like a replacement for Vanquish in all of these villainy decks. Because what I want you to think about is like stealing a Ruthless Raider, which is going to be a heavily played card in so many different decks. I mean, how many decks have I already shown you? I mean, you have Django, you have Admiral Piett Red, you have this deck, you have I can't even think of another one right off the top of my head, but there's so many decks of Ruthless Raiders played right now. So like stealing a Ruthless Raider, taking control of it, and then defeating it so that you can do 2 damage to an enemy unit and to their base after destroying the Ruthless Raider. That's just really cool. So I think that replaces Vanquish in any villainy deck. So, and then of course the sideboard is again still a rough draft, but we're looking at disabling Fang Fighter, which probably needs to be 3. A couple Crate Dragon, 1 Avenger. Just kind of messing around with that. Again, I need to mess around with this one more as as we've gotten more cards, because I did this early on, and just to kind of, the meta feels so aggressive, and I think it will be early on, especially like this first 3 or 4 decks that I just showed you here today. So I think that is, I need to tweak things more for just those decks. A lot of those decks I didn't play till after I had made this list, so I will adjust as accordingly. Definitely let me know how you guys are playing some of these lists so far, and if you've spent more time on them or cards that you think need to be added in or tweaked based on your testing. Asajj Tarkintown, I really, really enjoy this deck as well. This deck plays more like it definitely plays similar to Boba in some ways, the Boba list that I just showed. Obviously, we're playing a lot of turn 1 plays with the Hylobon, the Onyx, the Kylo, the Pike, and we're playing 6 in space and 6 on the ground on purpose, so that, and then the Daring Raid is our other version of that, so that we can, turn 1 Tarkintown very easily. We try to keep hands where we have 1 of each as often as we're able to, so that we kind of wait for our opponent to play a unit, and then we immediately damage ourselves. And obviously, Hylobon, gets stronger when you damage it. And we play several great units in here, like the Interceptor Ace, the Fifth Brother, the Hylobon Enforcer, the Devastating Gunship, and then obviously the Asajj Ventress Leader itself, which is really cool, so that we can immediately Tarkintown their unit on the opposite side and get momentum against our opponent. And then we're playing like decent pieces of removal throughout, so that we can, in case our opponent is getting too far ahead, we can slow them down while putting pressure on them. So it's really cool in here, like what you can do with the damage, because you're damaging things constantly with Asajj when you have units out. So you're using a lot of units, obviously, and then you're closing, you're finishing things off with cards like Death Trooper, the TIE Dagger, Vanguard, the space unit. So if anything's damaged, you can come in and immediately just play that and finish it off before or after Tarkintown, depending if you have the initiative or not, which, given your hands. So like if I immediately ping something and I'm able to claim the initiative, then I'll just play the TIE Dagger and finish it off on turn 2, right? Other situations where I've damaged things a little bit, then I can come in and finish them off and use it as a piece of removal, as I can with Death Trooper. The Imperial Interceptor is really nice for that as well in here, and I have a second copy on the side. The Dengar allows us to do some of that indirect damage to ping our opponent's units so that we can set up those knockouts. Of course, we're playing Power of the Dark Side, a couple of Perilous Position. I did a video on this one as well, but it's been a while. But I have updated this list recently. I like where it's at. I would probably add a 3rd copy of this Raider in the sideboard somewhere, though. And then we have the Vigilance, the top target, and the Onyx again for the life gain, because we are playing a 25 HP base, and sometimes things don't line up, so we need to have those ways to recover and save ourselves. Devastating Gunship is obviously one of our best targets for Asajj Ventress as a leader, and you can really just run the game. You run your opponent over if you're able to keep Asajj on the board as a pilot, especially if it's on like a Gunship or a Ruthless Raider. Just giving it those +3/4 stats, and then being able to damage yourself plus another unit is really cool because like you attack him with a devastating gunship, you can damage yourself and make it stronger, right? Or if you're attacking in, you can damage a ground unit like a Hylobon and then damage one of their units on the ground. So make Hylobon stronger and damage one of their units. And if you've been pinging everything and setting up knockouts, you can really do some cool things with Asajj when it is deployed as a space unit. And it's no slouch as a ground unit either. It's a 4/6 with grit. So like, there's an argument you could put like a fallen lightsaber or two in here. Originally, I had that in here, but I found that the space side of things can be really a lot more devastating, and I was focusing more on that. But I definitely think because of like Fifth Brother and Asajj, like it's worth having one or two copies of that. It's still good on things like Death Watch Loyalists and stuff like that, but that's kind of a got to play around with it a little bit more. But another fun one. I really enjoyed this deck. Admiral Piett Red. Okay, this one is definitely going to be one of those decks that you see a lot of. I've seen it a lot already on like Karabast. Just being able to like play Devastator so early on with Admiral deployed is just crazy. And then they're just like dropping ships, like big bombs over and over and over on you, like, and it just gets crazy. So I definitely think this is another one that's just insane. So they're ramping up early with like resupply, super laser tech, and the resupply carrier. So you have 9 pieces of ramp. You're using the Admiral Piett unit to ambush in those big units is what I was talking about. If they're able to keep that on the ground and keep it alive, if you're not able to remove it right away, then they're gonna benefit off of ambushing in these really powerful space units pretty quickly on you. So you really, when you're playing against this deck, you have to try to run it over before it gets going. That's like your best bet. I think when I was playing Wedge Yellow and maybe even Poe ECL, I was able to do that. But you feel like you're definitely on a clock. Like if you don't hurry up and close the game out, they're just going to destroy you. I mean, Devastator on your 8 resource, when they have 8 resources out, it's just insane. Like a 10/10 Sentinel that kills one of your things and does 10 8 damage, I'm sorry, because you have 8 resources to one of your opponent's units and then just closes the game out. It's crazy. This deck is so much fun too. And then you can even play Avenger in here and just cheat it out for because it would cost 11, but you can cheat it out for 2 less. So you could play it at 9 if Piett is deployed, and you can still play it at 10 resources if it's not, because you can do it for 1 less with the Piett ability. So I definitely think that that's worth having in here, which is really cool to be able to play that card in this list. I like both this one and the blue one. It's hard to say, so early on. Turbo Laser Salvo is a really cool card. Choose an arena. Friendly space unit deals damage equal to its power to each enemy unit in that arena. That just feels like, against space heavy decks, you're just going to potentially annihilate them. Even with Overwhelming Barrage, you're still going to be able to do that. But like, the turbo laser just like feels like it just wipes the board if they're all in space, right? And you can do, well, I'm sorry, it says choose an arena, so you can do ground or space. So that's just insane. Like do 10 damage to everything on the ground. It's nuts. So with the Devastator out. So just a really fun one. If you haven't tried out this new leader yet, absolutely do. I would say try out red and blue. From my experience, I mean, red, you want to play the Devastator because it's just nuts. And the planetary bombardment synergy with all these capital ships, just to be able to, because I mean, you're playing a ton of capital ships in here, so you're just able to just blow up the board so quickly once you get established if you're able to survive. Obviously, you're using like the early pieces of removal in here, like the force chokes and the open fires and the sentinels on the ground, even the sentinel in space with the Black Sun Starfighter early on to slow things down so that you can get established. The Colonel Yularen, I'm sorry, just helps you to kind of gain a subtle life as you're getting established, and then you're just blowing them out of the water. So it's a super fun deck. A couple Daring Raid in the side for decks that have a lot of cheaper units that are trying to go a little wider on you. And then here's the blue version. This is the the last one for today. I've also really enjoyed this one. Again, this one has the better pieces of removal and the more restore effects. So the removal that we have in here early on is the Power of the Dark Side. The takedowns, you get to use like the Chimera and the Fleet Sentinel in space in here, which is cool. Director Krennic, of course, is very good in here because we're able to get those those when defeated units out earlier, which is nice. The Chilsons on the ground because we're getting again we're ramping up so quickly. So some things this is another one I made way back, like I want to say like 2 to 3 weeks ago. Again, this is one of the first ones I did from the new set, so I definitely think this is another one I need to revisit. The Droid Deca is really cool in here as well, just to be able to kind of like sacrifice an Onyx and play it for 4 resources to have a 4/5 Sentinel. Again, allowing us to kind of pivot when we need to, play defense on the ground randomly. Like Onyx is one of our better when defeated cards. Yeah, this is one I need to kind of revisit as well, but this is a good starting point again. But yeah, I mean, let me know what you guys have been, what your favorite decks are, and how you would play some of these lists, or if there's anything you would add or change. Again, this is over the past 3 weeks, so some of these need to be tweaked a little bit. But I did just kind of want to do a video, kind of like a summary of what I've been focusing on over the last few weeks and what I'm most excited about. Uh, I mean, Admiral Piett is just so much fun, just being able to ramp so quickly and get up to these really big spaceships and then actually be relevant and consistent because of your ability to cheat them out sooner. But yeah, definitely let me know what decks you guys are building, or if there's any cards maybe I'm missing in some of these lists. Like I said, it's some of these I haven't touched in a few weeks as they were built early on. But I would love to hear what you guys are building, and what decks you're most excited to play with this new set coming out. But as always, y'all have a good one, and peace out.